Greetings to you, the People's Baptist Church. It is certainly again an honor and a privilege to greet you in the name of our risen Christ. Let me begin by offering a word of thanks to many of you for your continued support, the work of the ministry. This sermon, of course, is long overdue. We were scheduled to do it on the first Sunday of December, but however, pastoral responsibilities took prominence, and so I wanted to ensure that I got it done. I'm a little late. Of course, after the first Sunday, we went into our Advent series and trying to share some words of encouragement to you, the people of faith. But I definitely want to bring this sermon to completion. And so this sermon will certainly be placed on our family page, which will then allow you to engage that particular message. Again, my apologies. I normally am better with my preaching schedule, but again, pastoral responsibilities took prominence at that moment. But I just want to lift up a word in our text today, Micah chapter 6, and chapter 6 and verse number 1. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Briefly, I want to just talk a little bit from the thought, do the right thing. Do the right thing. You will recall on December the 2nd, my birthday, I turned 34 years old. That was a significant day, an amazing day, I should add. However, what added great significance and meaning to that day is the fact that we had a deliberative dialogue with several faith leaders in our community, or not only from our community, however, there were faith leaders in the Philadelphia area, should I say. We gathered together via Zoom to talk about the complex role of the church, the role of the church in a divided society. In that particular deliberative dialogue, we talked about the church as a refuge, the church as a mediator, the church as a prophetic voice. In that conversation, we discovered that it is difficult to place the church in one particular box, in one particular framework. But in some place, the church can somehow fulfill all three roles. The goal of this conversation was not to give a definite answer. It was not to give certainty but to be open to engage one another and to have a conversation. This was not the first time that a conversation like this ever took place. For within the biblical witness, there was a conversation that took place between God and the people of whom God chose. This particular prophetic pronouncement is ascribed to Micah, whose name means who is like the Lord. Judah is being described in this moment. When you read this text, one could imagine a scene in the courtroom, a plaintiff and a defendant. This is where God is bringing up a charge against God's people. The oracle starts off with a summon for the mountains to be a witness to the case that will be brought against the people. The Lord has a grievance against those whom God loves. In verse number 3, the Lord asks this profound question: what has been done that has burdened them? There is the recalling of what God had done in the history of the people. Notice what Micah chapter 6, verse number 4 and 5 says. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of God. The story of the Exodus comes as a reminder of what God did for a people who had been oppressed and marginalized. God brought them out of a horrible place there. But not only did God bring the people out of Exodus, or out of Egypt rather, but God talks about another event that took place in the wilderness, when Balak hired Balaam to curse the people. However, God used the man to bless them instead of cursing them. God has been involved in the history of the people. And I ought to pause parenthetically and say this, that just like God has been involved in the history of the people of Israel, God is involved in your and my history. God is involved. God has, and the same God, we sing it every Sunday, every so often. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word. He has never failed me at all. Can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. God has been involved in the history of these people. These were people who have been mistreated by those in power, yet God showed up and worked on their behalf. There's a beautiful there's a beautiful truth that must be raised. First, that God is not neutral. Listen at me. God is not neutral when it comes to oppression. God is not neutral when it comes to oppression. God is not colorblind. When God sees oppression, God is on the side, should I say, of the disinherited. God is on the side of those who find themselves oppressed. The good God does not sanction wrong, while it may be permitted to exist, and while God may allow it to cause havoc. God will ultimately stand. And that's the good news of the text, that God will ultimately work on behalf of those who are mistreated. The core of the argument of our text is found in the statement by God through Micah. With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? These questions that were raised on Wednesday reflect the questions that are lifted in our text. Let me say it again. The questions that we raised on that Wednesday, December the 2nd, are the same questions that are seemingly raised in this text. The people desire to know what will bring glory to God. For them, there is the notion that perhaps what we do in the temple means a lot. There are those who believe that God is impressed by our attendance and participation in church. Like, these persons seem to believe that God, that coming to church is all that God requires. These questions reflect the heart of a people who are worshipers of God. They're sincere. There are many who come to church who are not concerned about the world that is crumbling. They come to the church and offer worship. Once there is nothing wrong with, and there's nothing wrong with that, with worship. Each of us are called to worship, to bring God our heart of gratitude and thanksgiving. The tension of today, though, is worship alone enough to bring us into right standing with God? Is there more to the task of the church than worship? It is my conviction that this text is telling to teach us that our right standing before God is determined by how we treat each other, especially the oppressed. Let me say it again. The tone of our text is trying to teach us that our right standing before God is determined by how we treat each other, especially the oppressed. Again, this is what we came out with our conversation this week, and this is what the tone of our text is echoing, that our right standing before God is determined by how we treat each other, especially the oppressed. In the 1989 movie written and produced by Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing, Saul owns a neighborhood pizzeria in a primarily black community in Brooklyn, New York. One of the locals, bugging out, observes that his wall of fame does not include black celebrities. He concludes and surmises that if you have a business in the black community, you should at least have some celebrities, some black celebrities of notoriety. He feels that he feels like he is the right, that he has the right to make this argument. In fact, and Saul, the owner, disagrees. He says, listen, this is my wall. This is my business, and I can do with it whatever I please. So great was this tension that it leads to much racial tension. This story reflected the conflict of opinion. Essentially, the movie caused one to ask another question: what is the right thing to do? Like the movie and our text, we are struggling about what is the right thing to do as the church. Micah provides us with these ancient yet relevant words. God has shown you it. Oh, mortal, God has showed you what to do. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. The faithful are told that they have already been told about God's requirement. First, they are called to act justly. What does it mean to be justly? As people of faith, we are invited to live in a manner that seeks to ensure that the oppressed are treated rightly. We ought to make sure that the oppressed have fair housing. We ought to make sure that we ought to fight for the lives of black bodies. We ought to speak against any form of oppression that seeks to hold a people group down. Secondly, they are told to love mercy or unconditional love. It is our love for God that binds us together as a human family. This love moves us to be present in a world that is racked with so much pain and turmoil. Thirdly, they are told to walk humbly, carefully before their God. What does this mean? We are called to be with the people of faith in this world. Doing the right thing has nothing to do with your political affiliation. It has nothing to do whether you are Democrat, Republican, or independent. No, it is a requirement that we be followers of Jesus and be willing to just be good people, to do good by people. For we must be willing to feed the hungry. That doesn't require political affiliation. We must be willing to clothe the naked. That doesn't require a political affiliation. We must be willing to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. That does not require political affiliation. We must be willing to show what it means to be a Christian. That doesn't require political affiliation. Michael invites the chosen people to just do right. Today, that same appeal is given to each of us. The call to do right is a part of our discipleship. We do because we are part of the family of God. Let us recommit ourselves to the task in this new year, should I say now, as we come on the other side of 2021 or 2020. Let us commit ourselves to the task of being the church when the world is looking for hope and healing. Remembering these solemn and sacred words. If you cannot speak like angels, if you cannot preach like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus. You can say he died for us all. Our text invites us to consider that our right standing before God is determined by how we treat one another, especially the oppressed. The prophet calls for the people to do as they have been commanded by God. Today, we know what we are called to do. As disciples of Jesus, we are challenged to just treat the oppressed right with care and concern. And herein should be our response. And church, this is the response I invite you to have today. As a result of the sermon that was preached on the 5th Sunday of November and the deliberative dialogue on the 2nd of December. And as a result of this sermon that you're going to hear, on this day, here's what your response should be. I'm going to live so God can use me, anywhere, at any time. I'm going to live so God can use me anywhere, anytime. I'm going to work so God can use me anywhere, anytime. I'm going to love so. I'm going to walk so God can use me anywhere and anytime. So my only appeal, do the right thing. God bless you.